Yay! Hey everybody, how are you? I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. This is a very big moment for me and for Danika because she's my very, very first guest. Um, so
Popping your YouTube cherry.
yes, you are.
Sorry, there. Tone of the conversation has been set. Now
But
you
it's so
know.
appropriate. It's so appropriate for what we'll be talking about today.
Exactly.
We're getting intimate. But yeah, so this is the first one and I'm really excited about it. This is a new sort of branching out for me, and even I am using YouTube these days for so many things, and I thought, hey, I bet you there's other writers out there using it as well, so let's get in on the action. So I'm delighted to have Danika join me today. Now, Danika Bloom, which is such a fabulous name, she is a US Today best-selling romance author, and she spent 25 years as a technical ghostwriter for progressive not-for-profit organizations in Canada. At 40, she decided to be a published author, and after 10 years of arguing with her inner critic, she achieved that goal. And now she spends her days between torturing heroes and heroines on their way to happily ever after, and supporting pre-published romance authors to stop torturing themselves with negative thinking about their work in progress. Danika supports those pre-published authors in her courses and in her community called Author Ever After, which is such a fabulous name. Welcome, Danika.
Thank you. Hi, Emma. Lovely to see you again. Yes, so this might be a little bit casual because I feel like it's a friend. I'm talking to a friend. So apologies to people who might feel like they've just stepped in on a conversation that, they're eavesdropping on, because you make me feel like that, Emma.
Yay! No, but it's so much more fun when it's just easy, and that's where often as well where I find that that's where the real kind of gold emerges, when you get into the flow of the conversation and then you remember something that happened to you and an experience that you had, and that's the one that really kind of helps the writer move along in their journey as well. But we are going to be talking about intimate scenes, and I thought it might be well, let's start with you, shall we? Let's start with you, because you're a writing coach and you're an author yourself. So what was it about romance stories, first of all, and then what was it about coaching that sort of lured you in?
Good question. Okay. So coaching, we'll start there because I've been coaching longer than I've been writing romance. You mentioned that I've worked with progressive not-for-profits here in Canada, and my role had often been coaching. So delivering workshops to organizations to help them with their communications. That was my thing. And I did that for more than 2 decades, loved it. The funny thing was, the thing that never, I was a helper with all of these organizations and I loved the work that they did. Their work was never my work. And so when I turned 40, I decided I wanted to write something that was my own. I was also a ghostwriter for all those organizations. And not all those organizations, but many organizations. And I wanted to write something that was my own. And I didn't know where my voice was, what my genre would be. And I wrote my first novel coming from a place of having just gone through a very surprise divorce. And it was not a book that could ever be shared. It was a processing process, right? It was one of those. You want to say something?
No, I was going to say, I think that's what most of our first novels are. I think we're trying to figure stuff out and understand it. And it's, I've said this again and again, writing is more than just the words on the page. It's what we go through in the process and what we discover in the process as well. So I'm not, I can imagine, especially if it was a surprise divorce, then yeah, there's a lot to work out there. And I can imagine there was not a happily ever after.
There was not, in fact, a happily ever after. It was semi-autobiographical. It was autobiographical enough that it was uncomfortable for a developmental editor to read. And it was a brilliant learning experience, horrifying and brilliant learning experience. And after I did that, I joined a writing community and I learned a lot about like structure of novels and so on. And I still wasn't ready to write romance, though. I wrote the follow-up to that manuscript was called Mother Teresa's Advice for Jilted Lovers. And I took, I had a theme and I carried the theme, but I wrote it from a place of having healed at that point. And it's a dark humor women's fiction. And I realized in writing that book that I did love writing about the relationships and struggles in relationships. And I'd also joined the Romance Writers of America, and I became a volunteer and I became a board member. And because that's just who I am, right? Nonprofits, that like I was in my happy place. But I wasn't a romance writer, and I wasn't a romance reader at the time either. I read creative nonfiction. And I thought that I was going to write a book that I had titled. I had all the chapter titles. I had the outline. I did a brilliant, deep outline for a book that I called Girls Who Get Themselves in Trouble, The Unholy Communion of Sex, Religion, and Politics. And I spent a couple of years researching and writing and figuring out what that book was going to be. And I wanted it to be in the same tone as like Mary Roach. If you know Mary Roach or A.J. Jacobs, who write kind of really, they have really strong voices in their writing. And I didn't have a strong voice because I'd spent so much of my life as a ghostwriter. I'd spent my entire life as a ghostwriter. I didn't have a voice as Danika Bloom. Mm-hmm. So I went to the blog. I went to medium.com and I started blogging just to try to develop my voice and see what readers responded to. And it was fun. Pardon me. And I was writing about sex, religion, and politics from a first person point of view. And when I ran out of stories that I could tell about my ex-husband and my relationship with him, I was like, I can't start writing about my husband. I was married again. Like, he did not sign up for this, right? Like, that just wouldn't be fair to Dave. So it took me in another direction. And romance is a great medium for talking about the topics that can be hard to talk about, for really diving deep into relationships and talking about sex and normalizing all the different ways that people can be in love and fall out of love. And so that was the strange way that I came to becoming a romance author. It was blending my social justice thinking and I'm an oversharer. I'll tell you things like, yes, I will say things that you'll be surprised in, like, but
that's perfectly normal for you. That's what I find is you know, I always get surprised when people think I've overshared, and I'm like, well, that's just normal. Why would you not tell someone that?
Exactly. Like what? Exactly. It's I'm not shy about.
I'm fascinated though about the fact that you love going in for the hard, difficult subjects that we're taught to ignore, like religion, politics, sex. Mm-hmm. Let's cover them all. Exactly. That's making me laugh. But I'm genuinely sort of intrigued when you say that romance is a great way to delve into those subjects and relationships and the darker side of these things, because I'm not a romance reader, I have to admit, but that is not the image that I have of romance books. I see the kind of sort of cartoony cover with the drawing cover, and I see bare-chested men, and I see Regency women, and so it feels light and fairly surface. But so it's really interesting to hear you say, haha, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. And that's really interesting. And I had those same misconceptions before I started to read romance. I started to read romance in 2019. I grew up in a house that did not have romance novels. We had encyclopedias. We had important books in our house, right? Like, that was the house I grew up in. And my mother poo-pooed romance as, trashy. And we've heard, we hear all of the negative descriptors. So I came to it that way as well. And then, but I was in this romance, the RWA, all of these women who I'd become friends with were writing romance. And so it behooved me to actually start to understand it. And literally, but although it took me a long time to start to read their books, because like you was like, well, I'm not really interested in that. I read these other types of books. I really love creative nonfiction. Give me books about sex,
that are creative nonfiction, like, but anyway, romance is a really wonderful genre for talking about, um, well, it's an act of rebellion almost. Like the romance genre allows you to write about LGBTQ relationships, right? In a way that is safe and that is also popular culture. Because even though you and I didn't read romance, you don't read romance, I didn't read romance, it is still the most popular genre out there, right? And maybe people are reading it secretly, and hopefully more and more are reading it not secretly. But we get to talk about the things like, what is safe sex using, so back in the days, like in the Harlequin days, there was never any discussion of using contraception, and writers started thinking like, I want to represent relationships in a way that's true and meaningful. It is a fact that a lot of women learn about sex through reading romance. And so there's almost a responsibility for the romance author to be writing sex responsibly. Because if you're a virgin and you're reading about a virgin sex, and this young woman has an orgasm on the first time that she has sex, and you can't have an orgasm with penetration, you're probably going to be thinking, I'm doing it wrong, or I must not love him, because like all the things that we can think of. So becoming responsible in writing sex scenes is really important. Contraception is important. Different kinds of love between different kinds of people is important, because we can start to normalize those relationships. And yes, there can be bully romance, for instance, which is something that I don't read and I don't write, but lots of people love bully romance. And that comes back, that actually ties really closely to intimacy. Like, how can an author write sex scenes if they're writing steamy? Because there's also closed door romance, right? There is a couple of different subgenres of romance where you never see the sex on the page. In Christian romance, often they won't even kiss, because the intimacy it's not a physical intimacy, it's a spiritual intimacy that they experience.
Right. Okay. So it's not just prudish, it's just a different.
It's So, and well, I mean, happy to talk about, I want to talk about all the different kinds of intimacy and how they can be played. But that is why, I mean, that's what gets me so excited about romance, because it does come back to my social justice roots. Like, I get to be a social justice advocate when I write steamy romance with open door sex scenes.
Yay. I love it. I love that you've reframed this for me and totally opened my eyes to seeing romance in a different way. And maybe after we finish recording, I should get some sort of suggestions from you as to where I could start and change my view of romance and open my eyes a bit. Now, you made a very good differentiation there. So we've been mentioning about the different types of sex scenes and the responsibility around that. But the sort of focus of our conversation today isn't about sex, it's about intimacy, which is a different thing. And as you said, that applies not just to romance writers, but to any story that has a relationship in it.
Yeah, like a romance subplot, or any kind of relationship. Yes, absolutely.
So what, how should I ask this question? Okay, what types of intimacy then should writers be considering when they're writing romance? Are there different types, or is it standard?
So, and this isn't just, the types of intimacy comes from, I don't know, psychology research, right? Like it's not specific to romance. It's specific to lives, we as humans. And so first of all, intimacy is, if we think about the difference between sex and intimacy, sex is an act. You can describe that on the page as something physical. Intimacy is more a level of closeness that your character feels, so that they feel validated and safe. So that, if I'm thinking of an umbrella, I'm not sure which is which. There has to be, to be true and good and make a reader feel like they're getting, they're really being invested. At the top is the intimacy. There has to be that intimacy. below it, there can be sex, or maybe there won't be sex, but the intimacy is paramount. So there are 4 different kinds of intimacy that we experience as humans.
Mm-hmm.
There's physical, there's spiritual, there's mental, and there's emotional.
Right.
And in stories, like so if we're thinking in the different subgenres of romance, erotica would be just basically all you care about is the physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reader goes there to read about the sex. There's less plot, the relationship is the sex. So physical is erotica. And then there's the spiritual, which a reader will, if they're reading romance, that would tend to be the Christian romance focus, as I was saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the intimacy that they experience is going to be on the spiritual level. The mental and emotional I believe, we want to see that as readers. So as writers, we want to put that into any story that we write that has characters who are interacting and developing some type of connection. So
you might be about to go into this, but I was just wondering, what's the difference between mental and emotional?
So emotional is based on shared experiences. So it's your emotional intimacy. You come to that by taking risks, by being open and vulnerable. If you're sharing and as characters, as humans, often we are our characters, sharing fears, your deep feelings, your thoughts. And then the important part is, so one character will do that, not being judged. So emotional intimacy comes when the character feels safe enough to be vulnerable and then to be accepted by the other person and to have their feelings somehow reflected in actions that allows that character know they can trust them. And there's I don't know if I'll keep talking about emotional, and then we can talk about the mental, because the emotional intimacy there is, I found this before I started writing romance. My sister and I started dating at very similar times. We both went through a long-term relationship and a breakup at kind of the same time. And I found online this study, which was by a psychologist. His name is Arthur Aaron. And I can't remember the name of the study specifically, but it was 36 questions that he crafted. And he had posited this idea that if you so Emma and I are on our first date, and or Emma and her husband are in a relationship, but let's say we're on our first date, and we ask questions of each other that go through the different levels of emotional intimacy. By the end of that conversation, if we give ourselves, like, there's 36 questions, I ask, you answer, you ask, I answer, the same questions, those people will have they will have a much more deep connection to each other. And so he did this experiment, and he found, in fact, that it was incredibly true, and that people who were strangers coming into the experiment, who were paired by the university, by the researchers, actually came out of this having deep feelings for each other. Mm-hmm. So my sister and I found this research. My sister and I both used these 36 questions when we were meeting the men that we started dating. My sister ended up marrying the guy. She went on a first date with this guy, Bill, who she's now married to. And they spent 4 hours going through these 36 questions. She did it to the letter. And there she is, married 10 years later, still with the same, 15 years actually. Anyway, so the questions, I think, are really great to bring into our writing. Like, and not necessarily specifically as the questions, but if you go and find Arthur Aaron, and maybe we can share in the show notes the link to the 36 questions. But so there are 3 different levels, and I've written down a couple of them just because they're so much fun to give a sense. So the level 1 questions are questions that are just getting to know each other. So a question as simple as, before making a telephone call, do you ever rehearse what you're going to say and why? And so, we talk.
I do.
You do. I do too. Before a YouTube conversation with Emma, do you rehearse what you're going to say? Yes, of course I do. And why? Because I don't want to look like an idiot. Okay, now everybody is a little bit, they're like that much closer to knowing me, right? What would constitute a perfect day for you? So those are, they're not too vulnerable, but they do make you share a little bit about yourself. And then the level 2 questions, the trust is starting to be established. So if you're doing this one-on-one and you're each taking 4 minutes, you're probably an hour into your conversation at that point. One of the questions that he has of the 36 is, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know? Emma, what would you want to know?
Yeah, that's a deep question. What would I want to know? I'd want to know, am I on the right track?
Mm-hmm.
Will I die? Will I die happy? Not die happy. Will I? Yeah, am I on the right track? I want to know. Oh no, I know what I'd ask. I'd ask, what's my purpose? That plagues me a lot.
Yeah.
What
And
about you, Danika? What would you ask?
That was, well, it's funny. I hadn't planned this. Darn it all. I was thinking kind of the same things. Like, is what I'm doing going to achieve what I want it to achieve? So that comes back a little bit to purpose, right? Like, am I doing the work that I'm meant to do that will bring me the fulfillment, in all the different ways I need fulfillment?
Yeah.
So I would ask that. And then the next level is where the researcher says that intimacy is possible if, once you get to this level. And there are things like, complete this sentence: I wish I had someone with whom I could share.
A pizza.
I have to cough just as
I'll go a pizza. I love a pizza.
Okay, if you put pineapple on it, that might be taking us more into the intimate realm. I'm not sure. Is there anything too serious to be joked about?
No, probably not, I'd say.
That's a question, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people would say, yes, you don't joke about, terminal diseases. You don't joke about these. And Emma and I, before we started recording, we were talking about how my brother and I have this very dark humor about death. Like, we talk about, there is no subject that I won't talk about or joke about, which is really uncomfortable for some people. And that right there would tell you. So if we're writing characters, and I'm the kind of character who I'm trying to develop an intimate relationship with Emma, and I'm starting to joke about something that is really uncomfortable or painful or triggers trauma in Emma, that's going to create a scene. And it's going to show relationship development. And either they come back from that, or they don't come back from that, depending on what kind of book you're writing and what you need your characters to do.
Yeah, I'm already anxious for them and they don't exist.
Of course they exist. Of course they exist. So that's emotional. Mental intimacy is, or intellectual intimacy, sometimes it's called. That's often based in dialogue. So the other ones that the emotional, that can be based in dialogue, but it can also be based in like visceral, like you just said, I'm just feeling anxious for them, so that we can write that as the feelings that people have. With intellectual or the mental, you're referring more to ideas and opinions and life perspectives. And so you want to know that the characters are open to learning new things about life, about considering the person's ideas. And witty banter would be one way that you could represent that mental intimacy, right? So if you have them, I write rom-com, so witty banter is something that is a part of what I write. And that's how, one of the ways that I show that the characters are starting to develop intimacy, because they can have these fun conversations where they ping pong off of each other, or, and anyway.
Yeah.
And then the last one is the spiritual, which is all around your beliefs and values and feeling safe, talking about your connection to whatever divine energy you believe in.
Yeah, I can totally see how all of these fit in. And as you were saying, not just to romance, but actually any story about people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you use these questions now that you've discovered them? Do you, when you're writing a new manuscript, do you use them, sort of pick questions at random to try and get into that character and find out more about them before you start writing the story?
I don't specifically use those questions just because I've been doing this, like I've lived the questions with my husband. I feel like I know them well enough, but I do. So when I start writing, I am a discovery writer. I don't plot, but I know my characters really well. It takes me weeks and weeks to figure out who my characters are. And I'll use tools like the Wound Thesaurus and the Positive Trait Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca
Sign?
Puglisi. No,
No.
Becca Puglisi. I think it's Becca Puglisi, Angela Ackerman, and anyway,
Mhm.
there are these books which are thesauruses of the Wound Thesaurus, the Positive Trait Thesaurus, and the Negative Trait Thesaurus, and those provide kind of a platform for me to remember what kind of questions I want to be asking, because they will help me understand the starting places for each of my characters, and what they need to risk in developing those the intimate relationship with the other, and where they're going to feel, where they're going to feel scared and that. So.
Yay. So I think I understand this more about how you would certainly incorporate these elements into your stories, because you do like that deeper type of story. You're looking to incorporate some of your social justice interests in it as well. But for your sort of average romance, have you found that actually these are questions that, even if it's like a sports romance, hockey romance,
Mhm.
or high school romance, or second chance, that these are,
Yeah.
look at me knowing my subgenres, it's, that these are also, they need to be included as well,
They do.
in a story, if you want to, presumably if you want to pull in your reader and engage them in the story.
And make the relationship believable. And I just want to say, like, even though when I'm thinking of the stories I'm writing, I'm thinking, because I come at it from who I am, which has that social justice core to me. I'm not intentionally writing social justice. I just know that I can be true to my purpose in life, in being something who supports positive change in the world by writing romance. So I just want to clarify, like, I'm not writing social justice romance. Like, that's I'm not writing social justice. I'm just writing with a consciousness that I'm not going to do harm, and that what I create is going to actually, I hope, will make sure the reader is held in a way that is right. So yes. So the short answer is, every single romance should have. So the sports romance, let me think of a hockey romance that I loved. Home Game by Odette Stone, one of the very first romances that I read. The hockey player who's a millionaire, and the woman he meets is quite a bit younger, and he meets her in a, oh my God, I read this book 4 years ago, and I still remember it because it was so, because these characters, she made these characters work for me. A young woman who is homeless, but she's really, really smart, and he's sitting in a coffee shop. I think he's trying to do his taxes or something, and he's really struggling with all, and she knows how to do this. She's just like, it's a spreadsheet, give me your, like, she doesn't know who he is. And they develop a relationship, which is, it's a sports romance, but there's also the difference in what is it, when someone, oh my God, what's the word, like, he has everything, she has nothing. So there's a big difference in their, what's the word?
Disparity?
Yeah, yes. And yes, there's a big disparity. I can't even say that word. So the intimacy is developed as they develop trust, because she doesn't want to trust him. He's this like millionaire hockey player. Also, he is programmed not to trust a young homeless woman, but they're going to develop a relationship. We know that because it's a romance. So how does Odette Stone do that? She gives us opportunities for intimacy to be shown through the actions that they have. And things like, and I don't know if it's like, there's a scene where he listens to her. He hears what her dream bedroom has always been. She's never had it. And so when he invites her to come and stay in one of his spare rooms, he goes to the effort to decorate it exactly the way she would have it. Like, and it just makes me get all teary now. It's like that's intimacy, right? It's having that conversation where he's listening and he's like, I want to give this to you. It's so simple. I want to give you an IKEA bed. That's what you've always wanted. You can have, that's intimacy.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's lovely. That's so sweet.
That's romance. That's romance.
Okay. So I can see why we would have that. And how and is that part of, I guess that too then that forms part of the arc of the story, is that they start off strangers, enemies, friends, and then as they have those increasingly intimate moments and go through those 36 questions and get there, and obviously with a few bumps along the way, that if you're using those or thinking about it in that terms, you've already got your arc there as well.
Right. Yeah. So you know, I don't know about other subgenres because I've never studied them. Of course, I've read lots and lots, but I don't read them. I try to read like a reader and not like a writer. But you know, the standard formula in a romance is, as you say, they'll meet. Sometimes they'll be friends to lovers, so they'll already have that history, which means there's already a level of intimacy there. So your starting place is quite different. You've got your meet cute or your meet cringe, if it's, you know, that's the moment that they think that this person might convince them to believe in love, because in romance, one or both of the characters don't believe that they are lovable or that they can, you know, that love is possible for them. There's always the breakup. And then there's the dark moment where the two characters will realize, what have I done? Like, I had something that was really good. And the final, the grand gesture, which you really want to, like the grand gesture, it's so important that there's a risk involved for the character who's doing it, right? Because this is where their character arc shows that they've made the change from where they were at the beginning of the book to where they are now. So whatever was important to them at the beginning is now less important than their relationship with this person. So again, you have to be going through your story and looking at what those places of vulnerability are, where the intimacy has been developed, to know what that grand gesture is. It's not, you know, everyone talks about in the, who is his name now? John Cusack standing at the window with the boom box from whatever film that was, that
High Fidelity? Was it High Fidelity?
High Fidelity? Was it High Fidelity? Probably, yes. And you know, we look at that now. Why is that scene so? I haven't seen the movie in so long. I just know that people reference that one, which is probably a dumb reason for me to mention it because I can't give the context. But it's like, it has to have meaning. It has to have meaning. You can't just throw in the boombox and think, well, it worked in that movie, so it'll work in my book. It has to be connected. So
I can see then too that if one or both of the characters don't believe in love, then right away as well, you've got that wound there, you've got their flaw there. So you've already got you can investigate their past and what's led them to this moment where the book starts. Yeah,
right. And it will either come out in, it could come out in a sentence. The book I'm working on right now, her wound comes out in one sentence at the very last sentence of the first chapter. You know, she can't trust that she, you know, a man she's with won't up level to a better woman once he sees someone better, and her wound comes from her father leaving her mother at a certain point in the marriage when he became successful, right? So now we know she fears successful men, and so her wound and the intimacy that the hero is going to have to deal with, it's going to have to be moving her from fearing someone who has more than she does to accepting that she is lovable even if she doesn't have the financial means or doesn't have these things. So the steps along the way to developing that are going to have to reflect her starting to see that she is worthy in those ways that she didn't think she was worthy. And how can the hero show her that she is worthy? And it's through the stages of intimacy. And it's not just the physical, the sex. The sex has to be great in a romance, of course, but that's not the only thing. It's the others that are also important, which also applies to all the other types of books where there are.
Yay. Yeah, so I'm just talking about, you know, that your story there that you're writing at the moment, and the character who she, you know, we've seen about her wound, and so thinking that she's not worthy. So that intimacy, then it's not just it's not only with the protagonist or the other person in the book, but actually she's sort of having to get more intimate with herself, perhaps on an emotional level or in a intellectual level.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. There's, yeah.
Well, listen, I'm conscious of time. We're slowly kind of moving towards the top of the hour, but I wondered what would be your 3 top tips for anybody who is looking to write intimate scenes or up level their intimate scenes? What are the sort of things that and not necessarily for romance, I guess,
for any,
yeah, that don't feel, and I know this myself, I've written intimate scenes, non-sexual and sexual, and you always are kind of like, is that, and as someone who shares too much, is that too much? Have I
right.
have I overstepped a boundary here, and it's turned into a bit of a cringe fest?
Right.
Or you know, what would you help, how could you help us with that?
I would say, so I might have referred to these already. So one thing would be to, for building intimacy, would be to let the characters be vulnerable and mess up. I mean, we know we don't want perfect characters, but if you want to have the other characters see them, accept them for who they are and all of their imperfections, that helps develop intimacy between the characters, and it also helps the reader relate more to them, and also there's more believability in the development of the relationship between the characters. So that would be one thing. A fun one would be to have the more normal character. So if you have a character who has a particular quirk or habit, or is, you know, somehow looked at as an outsider to other people, have the more normal character start doing things in the same quirky way that the weird one does, right? So it could be in speech or actions. I was trying to think of an example that would just be silly. Like and the thing that popped into my head was a guy rides, if it's an office romance, or they're 2 people who are working together, and he rides his bicycle to work, and he always tucks his pant leg into his sock so it doesn't get caught in the chain. And he never remembers to take it out. And so people at the office might make fun of him. And she could, or he, if it's a male-male romance, could, instead of saying, hey, you want to take your pant leg out, could just start tucking their pant leg into their sock too. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna be cool, because it's cool to wear one pant leg tuck. Like things like that, if it's like rom-com, right? So I'm a little bit silly, but have them do that. And then visceral language, like, is so important. You have to show the emotions from the inside out. So don't describe how they're feeling from the omniscient. Get inside their bodies and like feel the love, the hate, the anger, the fear, the finally feeling acceptance, all of those. Use the 5 senses, like use them so that you can, yeah.
Yay.
And
It's amazing how much of storytelling does come back to the 5 senses, and just really putting yourself in that character's body and how that might feel, and in all 5 ways. Yeah, it's one of the sort of pieces of advice I give people all the time, is slow down and put yourself in their position and start there and see how it goes. And if the way that you would respond doesn't match the character, then you've at least got a starting off point for how they might respond.
yeah,
and if they do respond in the same way as you, fantastic, that's a little bit easier. But yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how just by imagining what it would feel like to be that person can open up so much. Those are great tips, thank you.
No, thank you. This was a whole lot of fun.
I do like the idea of the quirky one as well, and that sort of solidarity, and quirky being cool.
You know, one of the 36 questions is, when was the last time you cried in front of somebody? And why? And it was just like, it occurred to me just now as I'm like wiping the tears after talking about a romance I read years ago about like, and you said, you know, I almost feel real. Like these characters have to feel real. We have to think, oh my God, like that poor young woman, she's aged out of, you know, she's aged out of the system. So she's now homeless, you know, like
Yeah.
you want to relate to them. That makes what makes the story, people talk about it, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we want about our stories. We want people to talk about them. And
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear this again and again and again, don't we? That it's the characters people remember. It's not the plot line necessarily.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we've covered a lot, I feel. I particularly love you sharing the four types of intimacy and just how valuable that is for every story that's involving a relationship of some sort. Just away from romance, actually, I wonder what your thoughts are on, say, if you've got the protagonist and the antagonist, you know, if you've got a villain and a hero, do you think that they kind of work in the same way, or you can use elements of those levels of intimacy?
I so when you talk about antagonists, I think, you know, like Moriarty and Sherlock, or Batman and whoever. So I am not an expert on that, but my instinct is that yes, because in those stories, typically the protagonist and the antagonist are looking, they want to achieve the same thing, right? So they can relate to each other in that they both, let's see, Moriarty and Sherlock are both smart. They want to be the smartest man in the room, right? So we can have them connect on a level where that would be an intellectual intimacy, right? Like where I can see that we can see their relationship development through conversation and trying to one up each other and get a sense for how these two people may be coming at how they achieve their smartness differently, but they are really, there's a connection there.
I guess
And
too, there's the shared history, the shared experiences. If you're writing a series as well, and if it's a connected series, then they've been through various crimes together, solving crimes, committing crimes. They know each other's MO, and so there's that kind of building of it. They might not want the same thing, you know, they might not be friends necessarily, but there's perhaps a mutual respect there, or an admiration, or they know how the other person works, and so maybe that's a form of intimacy as well.
And you could show that possibly through well, when they, like, having to take a risk where you stand to lose something, and having the other person having a role in that some way, can also show that the relationship, the depth of the relationship. So yeah, intimacy doesn't necessarily, in romance, yes, you want it to be positive, but that intimacy, like in real life, it can be used against you, right?
Yes, oh yes, especially yes in those darker stories. Well, Danika, thank you so much. Just before we finish, is there anything that I haven't asked or we haven't covered that you think it would be useful for us to just to sort of think about or know about? So do you think we've done a good job?
I think we have done a good job, and I think if there's one takeaway, like in a tweet, if someone just went scroll to the end, it would be that you want to use your intimate scenes, develop the intimacy and use the intimate scenes so that the character changes in some way. The scene that you're writing that is focused on intimacy should make them more vulnerable or more confident, or you mentioned like make them more themselves, or more connected to the other person in a meaningful way. And if you can see that your scene is doing that, then, you know, check off the box that, okay, I got intimacy in this scene.
Brilliant. What good advice. Now we can let people know that Danika is going to there is a blog post that's going to go up. So if you want to know a little bit more, or have just have something to hand that you can read while you're thinking about your own scenes, we will be linking to that. So please do look in the show notes. If you have enjoyed the conversation, what is it you've got to do on YouTube? You've got to say, hit the subscribe button and the little bell so that you'll always know what's coming up next. But just to finish off, Danika, tell us, where can our watchers, our listeners, find out more about you and your writing?
You can check out a romance book if you've never read one, danikabloom.com. And if you are a writer who's interested in, a writer of romance, specifically interested in joining a community with other romance authors, I have a community called authorEverAfter.com, and a program that, so really the community is for pre-published romance authors, as Emma said. So if you're at that place where you are writing romance is a passion for you and you want to publish, I would love to help you go through those stages and walk you through all of the different steps to get from pre-published to published romance author.
Oh, exciting. Pre-published to published. Fantastic. Lovely. Well, we'll definitely be linking to those. So Danika, thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me be your first, Emma. It was a delight.